All right. Yeah, I'm there. Good evening. I hope everybody is having a good week. I know some people are gone with being on fall break, and I hope that they're having a good fall break, but it's good to see everyone tonight. I know we had some strange things falling from the sky this week that we hadn't seen in a long time. I went and stacked a bunch of firewood in the back of my truck because I thought the rain was over with, and then about 12:30 it came a deluge, and so that was negative. We're trying to go camping this weekend. But we're going to be in chapters 15 and 16 tonight. We're seeing a little bit of transition. This is where reading the books of the Kings becomes a challenge. It won't be for the rest of 1 Kings, but you'll see this in 2 Kings. Some of the chapter will talk about the kings of Judah, then it'll talk about the kings of Israel, and it'll talk about in so-and-so year of the so-and-so king of Judah, so-and-so became king of Israel, and then it flip-flop back and forth. And so it's kind of hard to tell. It'd be nice if it just talked about Israel, then turned around and talked about Judah, but that's not the way that it works. But now after we finish today, or tonight, excuse me, the rest of 1 Kings is going to deal with just one king of Israel, and that is Ahab. And so we will see that story and also the story of Jezebel and just the continuing decline of Israel in the northern kingdom. And then we'll also see the time of Elijah and his time and kind of the juxtaposition against King Ahab. Ahab was a terrible king, as we'll see, but there's glimmers of hope in his life at times. But tonight we're going to be the post-Jeroboam time of the northern kingdom and the post-Rehoboam time of the southern kingdom of Judah. And bounce back and forth a little bit, but not a terrible amount. We'll see the kings of Judah starting out. So with Judah, at the beginning of chapter 15, we see two kings mentioned. We're going to call this Abiham, Apayam, you might say Abayam. I underlined that portion in this slide because it's interesting, this name that's listed here. He is listed as Abiah in the book of 2 Chronicles. Most scholars think that is a correction because Abiah means Yahweh is my father. This name means Yam is my father. And Yam is the Ugaritic sea god. And so even this man's name in 1 Kings is after a foreign god that we have here listed here. And so that's really just even tells you how terrible it is. What kind of Israelite or even Judahite names their child after a foreign God? And so we see that he ruled just for 3 years. The text tells us that he sinned just like Rehoboam. His father sinned. His mother's name was Mechah, daughter of Absalom. Now we're also going to see that Asa, that we'll talk about here in a minute, your text lists as having the same mother. And so that may lead us to believe they were brothers. But it clearly is Asa is Abiham's son. But the reason that this listed as the same name of the mother, I'll explain in a minute, because we got sort of a queen-mother situation probably going on right here. However, David's legacy continues to go on, and the Lord keeps his promises. You know, it's supposed to be that these kings that followed in the lineage of David behave like David and follow after the Lord, and their heart is after the Lord. That doesn't mean they're mistake-free. I think sometimes we look at these kings and we think, oh, they're supposed to be perfect. Well, the issue is that they're just so far from perfect. And the issue is primarily, really almost exclusively, their dedication to idolatry or foreign gods. And it also, it's almost tiresome. It's almost tiresome to read the book because you're like, there's no surprises here. I'd like to see a king that was a murderer or something. Of course, we'll kind of see that with Ahab as we go through, at least an accessory to murder. I'd like to see him do something different because it's just over and over and over again that, okay, I know what this king's going to do wrong. I can close my eyes. I don't even have to read it. He's going to chase after these gods and disappoint Yahweh. But here we have this conversation about David. We're going to see when we talk about the kings of Israel in the latter part of chapter 15 and chapter 16, it's a complete mess as to what dynasty we're talking about. And dynasty is even a loose word with some of these kings. But we're going to continue to see the house of David over Jerusalem and Judah because God keeps his promise and David's good deeds have followed after. Of course, we know David wasn't perfect. And I don't think anytime Yahweh expected the kings of Israel to be perfect because David was far from perfect. Now, he had other issues besides just the situation that's mentioned here in 1 Kings 15 with Uriah the Hittite. Of course, this doesn't get mentioned in the books of the Chronicles because they don't want to say anything negative about David. But here we have, nevertheless, for David's sake, the Lord his God, we're talking about Baalim, gave him a lamp in Jerusalem. He let him be the king in Jerusalem by setting up his son after him and by establishing Jerusalem because David did what was right in the eyes of the Lord and had not turned aside from anything that he commanded him all the days of his life except in the matter of Uriah the Hittite. Now, David did some other things that we wonder why God doesn't point them out as being displeasing. David was a husband to many wives, something that the king of Israel was not supposed to do, many wives and many concubines, and all of his children in the long term turned out to be terrible. And so there are definitely some failures in David's life, but the sin with having sex with Bathsheba, committing adultery with her, and then having her husband eliminated, essentially arranged murder of one of his top generals, was a despicable act. We know that David was repentant of that. We know that David suffered mightily for that from the loss of a child. But here we have that David was in general good. One thing that David did not do is commit idolatry. He never gave up on Yahweh being the God of Israel and worship being centralized in Jerusalem. He conquered Jerusalem and was able, that way they were able to build Solomon. His son was allowed to build the temple there. And so the dynasty of David, the lineage of David continues to be in Jerusalem and the southern kingdom of Judah. That's not the case with the northern kingdom of Israel. We also see a protracted civil war that's going to be the case really throughout the time that the northern kingdom is in existence. And it's only in existence for about 200 more years, a little bit less than 200 years from this time period that we're at right here. And of course, we won't get into that in this class because we're not covering 2 Kings. But the war between Jeroboam and his descendants, or the ones who, I shouldn't say his descendants, the ones who follow him on the throne of the northern kingdom is troublesome. And how terrible it would be, and I can't speak for what Yahweh feels, but to look down and see this terrible departure into idolatry that these kings are, and then his people are at war with one another. How disappointing is that we have brother against brother, Israelite against Israelite, killing each other for territory and for political reasons. This is not what God intended at all. Oh, what it would be like to go back to the times of Joshua. And even really, if you want to be honest with you, the times of Saul and the time of David, when they were not at each other's throats. We even will see later on that Asa, King Asa, makes an alliance with a foreign power against his own people. I mean, things have really, really gotten bad to be this far off the tracks. And so Abiam, we don't see a lot of literature about him, but we see the time marker in verse 9 of chapter 15. In the 20th year of King Jeroboam of Israel, Asa began to rule over Judah, and he reigned a long time, 41 years. And his mother's name is Maacah, daughter of Absalom. What most scholars think is that obviously Asa was the son of Abiam, but she's named here because his mother was, his grandmother, if you will, was probably still alive and in the position of queen mother. Because we see over in 13 in the same chapter, and he removed his mother Maacah from being queen mother. Your translation may say something different. I'm just using that because it kind of relates to maybe what we think about when we think about modern day monarchies. Because she had made for her an abominable image of Asherah. And he cut down the image and he burned it at the Wadi Kidron. And so things had gotten really, really bad because we see all the things in verse 12. He put away the male temple prostitutes. He removed all the idols that his ancestors had made, but he did not take down the high places of worship. Now keep in mind, they have a place to worship because this is the southern kingdom of Judah. This is not Israel, who could be like, well, we don't have a centralized location. We don't have the temple anymore. That's under the control of the southern kingdom. And so these high places, there's no excuse for for Judah using these high places of worship because they have a place. They have the temple for worship rituals to be placed in and doing those things. And he brings into the house of the Lord gifts of silver and gold and utensils and of his own father's stuff. We're going to see that he winds up giving those away here pretty soon. So he cleans house, we say, at least sort of. You know, Asa would probably make the list because it's a very short list. The list of the kings of Israel, the northern kingdom, that pleased the Lord is 0. But when we look at the southern kingdom, there are a few. We won't get into many of them because we're not into 2 Kings, but at least in 1 Kings, we will see that Asa is one of them. If you go on and study the rest of the books of the Kings, you will see that kings like Josiah and Hezekiah are some great kings, good kings that do things. And really, Josiah being the greatest of those. Josiah is really probably the best king that ever reigned over the Israelites at all, including David. I don't mean militarily, but I mean as far as doing what's pleasing to God, it's really hard to find something wrong with what he did. He is at war with Baasha, who is the next in line king after the king Jeroboam. We'll talk in a minute about him. Like I said, you got this overlap that goes on that's kind of hard to follow in the book. Now, he makes a treaty because he's at war with Baasha, however you want to pronounce that, the king of Israel. And the king of Israel is kind of getting close to his territory. Keep in mind, when you have war between two adjacent nations or two adjacent powers, typically those border cities are the ones that go back and forth. You know, there's fighting over them, trying to control the border, either to stabilize your border or to expand your border a little bit. It's kind of sort of like Nazi Germany's taking of the Sudetenland. You try to get in and expand that border and get certain territories, and those are the territories that sometimes flop back and forth. Note to self, don't live in a border city between two countries. The best thing to do is move as far away as you can get. But Asa's having some trouble here with Baasha and maybe losing a little bit of ground. And we'll look at a map of those here in just a minute on some of these border cities. So he does a little bit of end around. Ben-Hadad, the son of Hadad, is a Syrian king based out of Damascus. And Damascus, as we'll see on a map here in a minute, is located to the north and slightly to the east of the borders of the northern kingdom of Israel. And so he is supplying aid to Baasha. And so Asa's like, I've got to change this over. I need this guy to be my ally and cause problems. And so I'll ask you, why does the alligator cross the road? I didn't want to put a chicken up here. Why does the alligator cross the road? Get to the other side. And the other side, in this case, has got Asa's gold and silver. So he's going to pay off and buy the loyalty. Look, the king of Syria doesn't care what happens and who he allies with as long as he gets paid. Ultimately, what he would like to do is take over both territories. You know, we talked about these nations around Israel that had been kept at bay during the time of Solomon would love to come in now. They love this civil war. They're going to keep stirring up trouble. You know, and who cares what side I'm on as long as the Israelites keep killing each other off, and one day they can become easy pickings for us to go in and take over this territory. And so I know this is kind of hard to see, but what I meant was Damascus is a little bitty illegible. This looks a lot better on my computer screen than it does in here. But Damascus is way up here where the arrow is pointing, and the territory that Ben-Hadad begins to assault, Naphtali is one of the territories mentioned in your text, is up here in the northern part, whereas most of the battle is going on down in the southern part, near the lines between Ephraim and Benjamin down there and kind of in the middle of that. So what happens is, since he turns Ben-Hadad to his side, Asa now puts Baasha in a two-front war, much like we see with Germany in World War II. And so that causes trouble. So that means Baasha now has to divide his troops up. He has to marshal forces to both locations. And this just costs more money and more trouble and more lives. Because keep in mind, we are not talking about a time where professional armies, standing armies existed. These are the same people fighting in war that have to go farm the fields and have to go harvest the grains and do other things along those lines. What you see in the movies about biblical warfare is not true. They are not well-armed, well-trained soldiers that we don't see professional standing armies really until the time of the Greeks under Alexander. And so we're not talking about people that joined the army and made a living doing it. So not only does it sap your strength of your military, having to move them around, it also, you're losing people, they're dying. And that's just losing men who sire children, men who work fields, men who are artisans, other things that it just hurts the country in general and creates more instability through that. A little bit closer, zoomed in area, these are the cities near Jerusalem. The border's not that far from Jerusalem with the northern kingdom. In some of these smaller cities like Mizpah, Ramah, Geba, Bethel, these cities are ones that seem to be fighting back and forth here in the middle. And because Baasha has to move some of his forces up north, we see that Asa is able to kind of move in a little bit and rebuild Geba of Benjamin and Mizpah. There we have in verse 22 of chapter 15. And then he goes on and he dies. And he is listed as being loyal to Yahweh. And so this will be a good king. This guy gets to be over in the good king. Not best king, but pretty decent king category, especially compared in comparative studies. Something else that you guys see in your text, and you run across this a lot, and we say all the cities that he built, are they not written in the book of the annals of the kings of Judah? We don't have those books. There are other sources that are no longer extant that we don't have about these kings. It is not referring to the books of the chronicler because the chronicler wrote his books much later than these are written. And so, but there's several ones. There's a book of Isaiah, and not the book that we call the book of Isaiah, but we see other histories mentioned in the books of the kings that were just catalogs, if you will, of what the kings did. So if you see those, just know we don't have those necessarily anymore. Really, the only other historical source that we have to the history of the Jews is that which is chronicled by Josephus in the 1st century and does contain some information that the Old Testament doesn't contain, probably coming from oral tradition that Josephus knew. But if you want to see another history of Israel besides what we're reading here, you can go and read the chroniclers' account. So you're going to see the candy cane version of the history of Israel. And also you can go look and read Josephus' account as well. So we think about Asa. His dad was not a good guy. And we think about, does the apple fall far from the tree? Indeed, because it's a mystery. The same situation is the case in 2 Kings, because Hezekiah's father was no good, and Josiah's father was no good, but yet they turned out okay. And they turned out to be, matter of fact, they turned out to be excellent. And Asa turns out to be excellent here. And and the Lord blessed him with 41 years as king, which is a long time. I don't know how old he was when he was made king, but obviously old enough where his grandmother, or young enough where his grandmother was still alive. It's amazing to me, and it's a thinking process, is why was he good? What made him good? And one of the things that I often talk about with students is we often picture that there was nobody good in Israel, or there was nobody good in Judah. But we know from reading on, like for example, when we talk about Elijah, and he says, there's nobody good left, it's only me. And the Lord's like, oh, no, I've got other people that did not bow the knee to Baal. That there were still good people in Israel and Judah that believed in Yahweh and were honest to him. Keep in mind, we're not talking about like modern day times where it seems like the leader of a country or a dictator, and everybody lives in subjection to him and he has control over all these things. Ancient kings, their ability to maintain control was very, very limited, because it's not as if Baasha, if there was trouble in the northern part of the northern kingdom, that he could just hop on a Learjet and fly up there and check in on it. You know, it's many days, if not weeks' journey to some locations, and communication, he can't pick up the phone, he can't email them. Communication is only as fast as a man can walk or a horse can ride. And so it's very, very challenging to keep things on there. So that doesn't mean that because leadership was terrible, that there was nobody righteous in all of Israel. Perhaps it very well may be that maybe his own grandmother was okay, but he deposed her eventually because she made an abominable image. So where did he get his faith in Yahweh? I don't know the answer to that question, but it leads me to believe that Yahweh was not completely forgotten, that he was not completely forgotten by every single soul in these kingdoms, that there may have been still some people, maybe some royal advisors, maybe some people in the court that were closet worshipers of Yahweh. Something else not to forget is Just because they turn to idols does not mean they abandon the worship of Yahweh completely. It may very well be, as we've talked about in here, in a syncretistic kind of way, that they have meshed together. I'm going to worship Baal, and I'm going to worship Asherah and Ashtoreth and Molech and whoever else is the flavor of the time. But I'm also going to worship Yahweh. We're going to continue to offer sacrifices there so Yahweh can take care of his area and Baal can make it rain and so can make us fertile. Whatever that may wind up being, it's wrong for us to assume that they just forgot about Yahweh. And so it's a good thing, but as we're not going to talk about Asa's child very much, but the apple does fall far from the tree when your children don't adhere to it. Why is the father good and the son bad? It's just a vicious cycle that we see in this book. Now we're going to move into, when we get through the end of verse 24 there in 15, we see that we're going to go through several kings of the northern kingdom of Israel, and also several houses, if you will. Their dynasties. It's not going to be one single one. And remember, as we studied before last week and really the week before that, Jeroboam's dynasty is prophesied not to last. Your house is going to be wiped out. Who's going to eat your body? Remember the curse? Dogs are going to, filthy, mangy, scoundrel and dogs are going to eat your body. And if you die out in the country, what's going to eat your body? Birds, you're going to be plucked. You're not going to be buried. All those terrible curses that God put on them. But boy, we have got all kinds of conspiracy and murder and backstabbing that's going to go happen. Let's make a great movie here. Everybody makes movies about David. I don't know why they make a movie about this. This would be a lot more intriguing and violent that we see here and what's going on. But it's mayhem. The northern kingdom is in mayhem. And if I'm the enemies of Israel surrounding it, I'm like, keep it going. Keep the mess going. Keep it in disarray. Don't stay organized. But we see these kings like Nadab, the son of Jeroboam, reigns over Israel, and he reigned 2 years, and he did what was evil in the sight of the Lord. And then we get Baasha, the son of Ahiah, in the house of Issachar, conspired against him, and he struck him down. And so this is not abnormal in the ancient world for one king to take over for another by killing them. And killing the previous king and taking that over and succeeding him. And so we have Nadab, who rules for just about a year or two. The years here are inexact, but in time frame where we are is late in the 10th century BCE. He's killed by Baasha. Baasha rules for a little bit longer period of time, and he wipes out the house of Jeroboam, and he fulfills Ahiah's prophecy that we talked about back in chapter 14. If you remember, it's when Mrs. Jeroboam, for lack of a better term, goes and tries to find out what's wrong with her son. And the prophet Ahiah says, hey, I know who you are, and let me tell you, bad things are going to happen to your people, and Jeroboam's house will be destroyed. And so we see that the case. And then we also are going to see that there's a prophecy against it. We talked about how popular the prophetic word is in the books of the Kings. So we're also going to see at the beginning of 16, that the word of the Lord came to Jehu, son of Hanani, against Baasha. And it says several things. Inasmuch I lifted you out of the dust. That's God's way of saying, I made you king out of nothing and made you ruler over my people Israel, and you have walked in the way of Jeroboam. We're going to talk about that paradigm here in just a little bit. And have made my people Israel sin to provoke me to anger with their sins. Surely I will take away the posterity of Baasha and the posterity of his house, and see if this sounds familiar. And make you like the house of Jeroboam the son of Nebat. The dog shall eat whatever belongs to Baasha, it dies in the city, and the birds of the air shall eat whoever dies in the fields. Now, we see this. What we know is that this is a terrible curse. We're like, well, I've already heard this curse once. Is this the only curse they can come up with? But it's a bad one. It is, like I told you guys last week, you're not going to be buried, which is a terrible fear by anybody in the ancient world, and not really something you look forward to either, or at least not something respectable done with your remains, even though we know we're not part of them anymore. You're not going to die, and animals, scavengers, are going to eat your body. So we see a similar thing. Baasha's got to be like, I wiped out that guy, and now I'm going to be wiped out in the same way. We're going to see, spoiler alert, the same kind of thing happen to Jezebel later on in our lesson. Elam, who is the next guy after Baasha, he is killed while drunk by Zimri. So can you see the mayhem? It just keeps going on and on here that we go through. It's interesting as you look at some of them. I want you to look. Elah, son of Baasha, his own son, began to reign over Israel in Tirzah, and I'm going to give you a map of that. And he just reigns a couple of years. But his servant, Zimri. Now, if you'll notice, some of these people who ascend to the throne through very, very terrible means, they don't have listed who their father is. Now, that's not weird to us, but we're used to living in a world of last names. Right? And somebody looks at somebody would call me Tim, son of Martin, or son of Ray, the name, don't really have the last names. When the father is not mentioned, probably what that means is they don't come from a very austere background or not from a family, because there's a reason for the writer of the books of Kings to mention who the family name is. Often it's something to do to give kind of legitimacy to them. But Zimri comes in. He is a servant of the commander of half his chariots, conspires against him, and when the king Elah gets drunk, Zimri comes in and strikes him down and kills him. And the time frame is in the 27th year of King Asa of Judah, and succeed him. So you can find this online free. There's no reason to try to work out these different kings. Just look for a map of the kings of Israel and Judah or a listing, and you can kind of see the overlap and things like that. Maybe your Bibles may have this in the background. Sometimes that's good for you to help picture all this overlap and everything that's kind of going on between the two of them. And Zimri does what the prophet Jehu said he was supposed to do. As soon as he had seated himself on the throne in verse 11 of 16, he killed all the house of Baasha. He did not leave him a single male of his kindred or his friends. Now, this is going to sound terrible, but that's really the way you're supposed to do it. If you take over from a previous dynasty, you wipe out everybody who could possibly have a claim to the throne. That's just how you do it, because you don't want to leave things behind. I think about like David leaving old Mephibosheth alive, and because he was crippled and this, that, and the other. The best thing for David to have done in the long run was do what? Anybody that's a descendant or male relative of Saul needed to go. Now, fortunately for David, he didn't have to kill his friend Jonathan, because Jonathan died in battle. But it's the right thing to do, because if not, you're going to have competition for the throne. That person's going to say, I'm the grandson of Baasha, I'm the rightful claimant to the throne, and you're going to deal with a civil war, which is what happens anyway, because Zimri was not king for a long time. Zimri made it a paltry 7 days in office. Sometimes you get what's coming to you. Now, you know what's impressive about that? What's impressive about that? Other than number 7. He did it quick, didn't he? That's what I was thinking. I was like, this guy got down to business. I mean, this is like Michael Corleone here. We're going to come in and we got to take care of it all on the same day and wipe it all out. The elders are upset. I mentioned the rated R movie in class, but shouldn't do that. Yeah, he took care of it all in 7 days. And what that tells us is the word of the Lord comes true, and sometimes it happens very, very quickly. Because look, as soon as he died, I'd start scattering. I start running for places. I start finding places to hide. Go and hide out in some dungeon somewhere, get away and hide. But he's able to track them all down and kill them. Now, it may very well be that all the people of the house of Baasha are stupid, and they didn't do that, and they didn't go hide from him. But I would go hide. But he winds up wiping them out very, very quickly. And it goes on. This is what I think is interesting. It says, because of all the sins of Baasha and the sons of his son Elah, they committed and provoked Israel to commit with anger with their idols. Now the rest of the acts of Elah and all that he did, are they not written in the books of the annals of the kings of Israel? Now look, Elah was only king for 1 or 2 years, or a couple of years. How much are you going to really write down? But it doesn't mention maybe all the things that we think about Zimri. I don't know what Zimri would have had. In verse 30, it talks about all the acts of Zimri and the conspiracy that he made are written down in the books of the annals of the kings. What did you write down about a guy who only reigned for 7 days? how big a deal is that, or how good is that to even think about? Now, we think about the conspiracy. Our government is often involved in the overthrow or conspiracies to overthrow or undermine governments of certain nations and trying to arrange things and get people in power. To be quite frank, we're not very good at that. We try to, we usher in somebody like a Fidel Castro. We usher in somebody like Saddam Hussein, and that doesn't work out in the long run. And we get fired at by our own weapons about 2 decades later. But we try to do that sometimes, and there's conspiracies going on here trying somebody to jockey for the position of the king of Israel, and it's changing all the time. We've already gone from the house of Jeroboam to the house of Baasha to the house of Zimri, and that's not the end of it. And so these conspiracies abound to go on. It's an old saying that the head, not easy sleeps the head of the one who wears the crown. You go to bed as the king every night, you better sleep with one eye open, even today, and especially in times of turmoil like this. Poor old Zimri, he didn't even make it a week. It's pretty terrible in his mind. Then we come to Omri. And Omri is going to be the house of Israel, the dynasty of Israel, for a little ways here. Ahab is going to be the next one we talk about in this house. So we get a little bit of stability. However, he's also co-regent. The throne is left empty by Zimri, and we move in the 31st year of the king Asa. Omri began to reign over Israel. He reigned for 12 years over that. But he also was dealing with Tibni as co-regent. As the people of Israel, it says in 21, are divided into 2 parts. Half the people followed Tibni, son of Ganath, to make him king, and half followed Omri. And so now we have a situation here where we've got 2 people who are making a bid for the throne of Israel. This is what I started out saying. It's just mayhem. It's just a big, terrible mess that we are dealing with here. Now, Omri winds up coming out on top. Tibni died. I don't think he was assassinated necessarily, but you just had 2 different kings jockeying for power down in the beginning. And now he did a little something different. He becomes the leader of the pack, if you will, and he does something interesting. So far, the kings of the northern kingdom have been stationed over in Tirzah, kind of right up there at the top of your map. Omri makes a move that really lasts until the end of the northern kingdom, and he moves over into the city of Samaria, after the town of Shemer, it says there in verse 24. And I'm trying to remember what Shemer means. I'm trying to remember, see if I can remember what that word means. Omri is not even a Hebrew name. That's something here I thought about in our notes. We're even getting into the fact that people don't even have Hebrew names anymore that we're going through. So he kind of moves the capital city over there. This is a good time to talk about when we have evidence for things that are included in the Old Testament that we find from exterior sources. And often people would say, we've got a mountain of evidence about the validity of the Old Testament. Well, mountain is a strong word. There are a few things, or several things we might say, in archaeology that have been discovered. And keep in mind, archaeology is only a science that's been going on for about 150, maybe 200 years. It really just started in the 1800s. People began to dig up cities and dig up things and find stuff. And I don't remember, David, was this in the British Museum? I think it is in the British Library. Is the Mesha Stela or the Moabite stone, sometimes it is called. That the story really around this is in 2 Kings chapter 3. And so we won't see the actual story of Mesha, the king of Moab, but he winds up going to war with the kings of Judah, and this in really about the beginning of middle of the 9th century, and this is what I call an autograph. You guys were here Sunday. Craig was talking a little bit about New Testament manuscripts. I can't remember if it's Sunday morning or Sunday night. Sundays all run together in my head. But we think about, he mentioned the word autographs, right? And you may remember that, meaning the original writings. Now, we don't have a single solitary original writing of any part of the Hebrew Bible. But this is what I call an autograph. Something that is carved in stone or baked in clay, written, I believe, in Akkadian. If memory serves, I'm sure Mr. Burkett was able to read it. It's in the Louvre. Okay, well, I'll see that next summer when we take Preston on a graduation trip. It's in the Louvre. I can always get committed, but between the French and the British, they got all the different biblical artifacts laid claim. This is what I call an autograph. It's kind of like when we see a stela of the Code of Hammurabi. It was carved in stone, and it's an original. And so we do have this. I don't know why the Israelites didn't carve their stuff in stone. They didn't carve things necessarily all the time on the side of mountains that they went through. But the Mesha Stela mentions the house of Omri. It goes and it mentions, it's not talking about Omri because that's not contemporary to Mesha, but he's at war with the house of Omri, who is still the dynasty that is in charge of Israel at the time they went through. So this is a piece of evidence. There's also recordings on the by the Neo-Assyrians, I think by, I know Tiglath-Pileser III and maybe Shalmaneser IV, about wars with the house of Omri. Now the Neo-Assyrians are the ones who ultimately conquer the northern kingdom in 722 BC, or completely conquer it. They had lived under their hegemony for several years. And they mention the house of Omri. I say all that to say Israel's history, the only history of Israel that exists is the Hebrew Bible. Until you get to the time of Josephus, and his writings are probably a combination of oral tradition that he knew and of the Hebrew Bible as a source when we look at the antiquities of the Jews and the wars of the Jews. The Israelite, this is their history, the history of their people laid out here. And although it is not true that archaeology has discovered the inspiration of the Bible being true, it has discovered and has provided evidence that the historical account of the Hebrew Bible is verifiable in looking through that. And so I want you to be encouraged that it's not just a made-up story, that there is evidence of the things that we read about in the Bible, like 2 Kings 3, if you want to go read that, you can, where they were at war with other nations. Israel is recognized. You will have people today that will say, well, none of this is true. Israel was never a people. These things are made up. Well, that's just simply not true. There are other nations that acknowledge the existence of the history. The Dan Stela talks about David, the house of David. And so we do have other evidence. Now, it's not like we have thousands of pieces of evidence from that, but we even have artifacts. And I know Don's been to the Israel and ancient Near East, or to the Near East several times, and you see things and things over there that are recorded. We have seals of Hezekiah. There's several things that have been discovered. So we do have things external to the Scripture that back up Scripture. Not every single word of it, and it can't make it inspired. We have to have faith that the things that we read about in here that can't be recorded and are not going to be recorded in history, the way Yahweh acts and that Yahweh is in charge of history, we have to have faith in the fact that these prophecies came true and these prophets said the things and then they came true. And so we did have faith in our Scriptures that we do have things not associated with Israel whatsoever that refer to things that happened in the nation of Israel. The other thing that we recognize in our reading here that we frequently occur is what I would call the paradigms that we see. I don't understand enough about Hebrew literature and the Old Testament and really things in the ancient world to know how much significance there is to it. But one of the things that you may see in your reading and you may have noticed is the paradigm for a good king and the ideal king of Israel is not Solomon, right? It's that if you're, like we talked about King Asa, you're compared to who? David answers David, his own namesake. And so, yes, we see that the paradigm for a faithful king of God's people is David. And David never turned away from his God. And to be frank, neither did Saul, but Solomon did. And a lot of the kings that follow after that do that. But the model paradigm that we see is for David. Now, unfortunately, the Scriptures don't get to say that a lot because not very many kings follow the ways of David and place their faith in Yahweh. But the paradigm that we see is all the ways of Jeroboam. And what a terrible legacy that is. And you look at it and you're like, why in this literature, other than just giving us information, for example, here we think about what this is 2 Kings 16:26. Omri did, in verse 25, what was evil in the sight of the Lord. He did more evil than all that were before him. We're going to see that as well. Now, how terrible of an indictment is that? Because we've seen some very terrible people, and he does all these evil things. For he walked in all the ways of Jeroboam, son of Nebat, and in the sins he caused Israel to commit, provoking the Lord, the God of Israel, to be angry by their idols. And then he goes on to say that all these things, and he slept with his ancestors. He was buried in Samaria, and his son Ahab succeeds him. Now, we're going to pick up in verse 29 of 16. We'll go backwards a little bit, in that, looking at that. One of these questions came up. I don't remember if it was in the men's class this past Monday morning or whatnot. And Dwight can probably remind me. Maybe it was in you that somebody said, why were these people so stupid? Who was that? That was Ron Barnes. Okay, we'll blame that on Ron Barnes. That's right. Didn't mean to throw you under the bus there, Dwight. But Ron was, and it was an excellent question is, could these people not see what was going on? And we talked a little bit about it. I don't think it means that every person in Israel, but as a whole, they departed from the ways of Yahweh. And why were they so hard-headed? Maybe we might use the word foolish, but we also may use the word ignorant, and also use the words poor leadership. And we talked about this and thinking about the y'all. In the absence of good leadership, what will people follow? Anything. They will follow. People crave leadership. And in the vacuum of good quality leadership, they will follow whatever. They will drink poison Kool-Aid. They will hole up in gun armories in Waco, Texas. They will do all sorts of things that seem, why in the world do people do that? They will follow dictators. They will follow genocidal maniacs. There's all kinds of things that people will do in the absence of good leadership. And also understand the concept of ignorance. We are blessed to have at all sorts of disposal the Word of God in print and electronic form, really even free of charge, in your native tongue, accessible to you at any time. Nobody here can say, you know what, I just can't find a Bible. Well, go down to Goodwill. There's about 50 of them. Oddly enough, we had trouble finding a Bible here in the church lobby the other day. But we wound up finding one. I was like, it's really going to be embarrassing if we can't find a Bible here at the church. But we found one to give to somebody. But keep in mind, these people couldn't read the Word of God for themselves. It's not as if a Torah scroll was in every household. It's not as if they were even literate and able to read it if it was. They had to rely on godly leadership to tell them what to do and to follow the ways of Yahweh. But now, they certainly could know from the hearts of their parents that Yahweh is the only God. Hear, O Yisrael, in Deuteronomy 6. Say that prayer daily, the Shema prayer. The Lord our God is one. And you teach that to your children. You talk about it in your rising up and in your laying down, and you're going out and you're coming in. We have issues of parental responsibility that God gave that they weren't taught. And if you go about doing that for generation after generation, for decade after decade, I understand why the people of Israel didn't even know better in some cases. And so I think it's something that we can think about as last minute or so of class here. You should thank God every day because there are over 1,000 languages on this earth that still don't have the Bible in their native tongue. We sponsored a missionary for years and years and years who had to invent a language for a people, a written language for people, and then translate the Bible into that language. We have examples of it in our historical curio out there. What a massive undertaking. You are spoiled rotten. And people got burned at the stake for your ability to do that, get strangled to death. And the Bible's only been in your native tongue for about 400 years. And so keep in mind, and the elders of this congregation have to be very thankful that they can open up God's Word and try to get His guidance in their own native tongue. I hope that they don't make doctrinal decisions solely off an English Bible, but at least they're able to look at it and try to get guidance in doing that. Be thankful for that because these people did not have that ability. They had to rely on posterity. of teaching that, being handed down from year to year. And then, if they'd had godly leadership, like they do at times with Hezekiah and Josiah, that burn it all down. They get rid of all this idolatry, all these other things. They read the Word of God. They dust it off in the temple. And they say, you know what? We hadn't been observing Passover for hundreds of years. And go back and institute that. Be thankful that you have something to help guide your children, to guide your marriage, and appreciate the fact that we get frustrated with these people. And why didn't they rebel against the king? Well, that's easier said than done. It may very well be that it's out of ignorance and neglect of generation after generation that people did it. All right, for next week, read